watching moon and stars dancing around the beautiful sky. Yeah. Emotions, devotions, they come and take me so high up to the sky.
Yeah, any second.
That's why we should we can all converse. Hey, good out. What is it? Evening. Good evening, everybody. Hey, I got, my day's just been running one continuous thing from morning to afternoon to evening. Welcome to the Free Thought Forum. We have a really awesome show for you tonight. It's going to be great. My name's Jen.
I'm Rick.
And I'm Pam. And I have a couple of announcements, things that are coming up that you might be interested in if you're watching this show. First of all, there's going to be a great panel discussion about the Year of the Bible at the Midtown Scholar Bookshop in Harrisburg. If you haven't been to the Midtown Scholar, you should just go because it's a wonderful place to go. But on Thursday, November 29th at 7 p.m., there's going to be a panel discussion. Pennsylvania Nonbelievers President Brian Fields is one of the panelists, and it is sponsored by the ACLU, talking about the Year of the Bible. So that'll be interesting. And then in Hagerstown on November 15th, which I believe is this Thursday at 6 p.m., the Reverend Sam Singleton is going to be performing at the Crazy Horse Restaurant. This is also free of charge, although it is a restaurant, so they will expect that you buy something, and Reverend Sam will pass the plate. He is an atheist evangelist, and if you've not had the opportunity to see him, you'll enjoy him. So that's down in Hagerstown, but it's worth the trip.
He's very funny.
All right. Well, today we are actually, wait a minute, before we even get to our topic, we need to talk about last Tuesday.
Yes, we do.
Did something happen?
Why, yes, it did.
It did? Where was I when this was taking place?
That's right. You've got
Well,
to keep
you
up.
might have been home and not at the voting poll.
Oh, that.
I most certainly hope you were there casting your vote.
Indeed, I was. How
That
could that have
is-
escaped my memory?
Yes, that is a good thing. You know why it might have escaped your memory? Because Obama is still going to be our president for the next 4 years. So you probably just said, well, it's just on with the show.
And we've just been floating along in a happy cloud.
We
so-
have been.
Yes, it's been a great week so far. But there's a lot that happened at the election. Not only did Obama get reelected, but we have 3 states that have joined. How many other states do we have so far? I don't even know if I have
On
that.
gay marriage, but these are the first ones where it was actually put up to a vote and people voted to allow it.
So we have 3 states where the voters of those states are allowing same-sex marriage. And you have those states written down? Because I don't know.
Maine and Maryland are the 2 where the election actually took place, where voters actually passed gay marriage acts. And in Minnesota, they voted so that it could not, banning gay marriage could not be put in the Constitution. So it's sort of a double negative. But in those 3 states, the 3M states, Maine, Maryland, and Minnesota, we had a very good result last week.
Very, very good.
And my hat's off to those states because, I mentioned on the show a while back that in New York's been making a lot of money off of same-sex marriages. I mean, millions. People come in. Marriage is a booming industry, so let's get all the people married that want to, right?
And I have to give a little shout out to a couple of ministers. This is not something you will normally hear on this program, but there were 2 ministers in Baltimore who recorded 30-second commercials supporting gay marriage at some cost to themselves. This did not make them popular with their congregations or their fellow ministers. So congratulations to them. That was a brave and generous thing to do.
And we're all up for the brave, aren't we?
We are.
Yes,
We
we
support
are.
the brave.
And speaking of brave, we have 2 atheist congresspersons. Kirsten Sonoma in Arizona, and that's Arizona, folks. Think about that for a minute. And Tammy Baldwin in Wisconsin. Kirsten Sonoma is going to the House of Representatives. She is also the first bisexual person elected to Congress, open bisexual. Heaven only knows what they all do in their private lives. But she's the first open bisexual person. And then Tammy Baldwin, who's the first open lesbian senator from Wisconsin. Both are non-believers. Now, they both sort of dance around the word atheist, but they are secularists, unaffiliated, and do not belong to any religious community at all. Kirsten was raised as a Mormon, Tammy Baldwin as an Episcopalian. So good for them. I mean, that's a twofer.
Yes, it is.
Yes, now all we need to do is get those states. We need to get Arizona in on the ticket there.
I know. I just think Arizona, that just is amazing to me.
I was she open during the whole election?
Oh, yes.
I mean, that is quite shocking to me. And maybe it's just, maybe what it is there's a minority of people out there that don't support same-sex marriage, and that's the ones we're hearing from.
Well-
Those are the ones speaking louder than the ones who support it.
Well, we were talking about this before the show, that is the religious right as powerful as everybody seems to think?
Yeah, I think it's sort of more of a paper tiger. I mean, if you look at a place like Arizona, and it's really, really red, and then they have something like this happen, it's just amazing. It just shows me that the power of the religious right is not as great as people make it out to be.
Oh, and you know what? We missed one state. We mentioned Minnesota, however, the other state that did pass same-sex marriage, Washington.
That's right, you are right. Sorry
Washington.
about that.
Maine, Maryland, and Washington. So,
Coast to coast.
Coast to coast, it was a very
Yeah.
good evening. It was very
it
good.
was, Tuesday was a great evening. It really was. I mean, I'm very happy with the results. I'm really happy to see that people who are open about their sexuality are able to get in, because their sexuality should not in any way influence their politics.
And I think it just goes to show you that people really don't care that much when it gets right down to it, but they want to vote for the best person. And it's just a matter of giving politicians the confidence to come out and be who they are.
Yeah, and it's good to see. It's really good to see, and I hope we see a lot more of it.
I think we will.
I think it's more of a trend now that you will see more and more progressive legislation come out. You'll see more acceptance of gay marriage. And I think this is just the tip of the iceberg right now.
Yeah.
And things will be getting, hopefully, I'm saying things will be getting better for gays and lesbians.
I do think we probably reached a tipping point on that, where it's going to be very hard to go back. It's hard to picture any real restriction to gay marriage. I shouldn't say that. You do have Mississippi and Alabama and places like that where it's probably not very popular. Our own Pennsylvania. I don't know why I'm making fun of Mississippi and Alabama. I don't hear anybody talking about how we're going to have gay marriage here in Pennsylvania. So, but yeah, I think the tide is starting to turn.
Well, and another thing happened in Florida. Florida voted down Amendment 8. And if I'm not mistaken, that was an amendment that was going to allow funding to religious organizations, religions.
Religious schools, I believe.
Yeah, religious schools.
But that was voted down in Florida. So, I mean, and again, another win for the separation of church and state on that one.
And it was Florida. I find that surprising too. It's Florida.
I mean, what's going on here? Wow. A night of shockers, folks. You know?
Well, and when you read some of the religious right commentary on this, Cal Thomas, if anybody reads him, he's a political writer, but from a very strong religious bent. I think he was with the Moral Majority, although I could be wrong about that.
I think you're correct. I think he was, yes.
And his column after this, I mean, it's hard for me to ever feel sorry for Cal Thomas, but I almost felt sorry for him because, boy, does he not understand. He's just like, how could they do this? What's wrong with America's moral fiber? I mean, he was very upset about gay marriage, very upset about what he thought was the pro-abortion votes for Obama, which I think is a gross simplification of why anybody would vote for Obama. But he's just lost, and you just want to reach out and, pat him on the shoulder and tell him it'll get better, just hang in there.
Well, it's fascinating to listen to this because prior to the election, I mean, I would keep up with what people on the religious right were saying, and they were convinced that God was going to have Mitt Romney win because Obama, who's like this Antichrist creature.
He's a Muslim,
He's a Muslim, he's a Kenyan, he's all these horrible things, I mean.
And he's still the president.
And he's still the president. They were so convinced that God was going to intervene and this was going to be a landslide for Romney. And then all of a sudden it doesn't work out that way. So is God in control? Why does this happen? And so they have to come up with reasons and saying that, well, God has abandoned us.
Right.
God's
Turned his
wrath
back.
is coming towards us.
No, that's not it.
And
God works in mysterious ways.
He works in mysterious ways. And
yeah,
they are kind of pretty much beside themselves trying to figure out what went wrong.
Yeah.
And it's not their policies. It's not the fact that most people are rejecting their policies.
of course not.
They think that everybody loved their policy. It has to be something else. It had to be, and they were coming up with all these excuses as to, Bill O'Reilly said, too many minorities are voting, because it's not traditional America
That's
anymore.
right. Those damn minorities.
Too many minorities who want stuff. Darn the luck that the people who want things. And all kinds of other blame for this. Hurricane Sandy was blamed because that stopped Romney's momentum.
But wait. Now, couldn't God have controlled Hurricane Sandy? I'm confused.
Well, you see, from what I've read on certain right-wing sites, Obama has a weather machine up in Alaska that can control the weather, and he did this to
The East Coast.
yeah, for the East Coast. And it's amazing. I did not know that, we had this power to control the weather so much that we could actually have this massive hurricane come up along the East
Well,
Coast.
I'm a little mad at Obama then because, all my favorite boardwalk rides gone.
Well, and the East Coast was on his side. You would think if he could have a hurricane that would suppress the vote, he would have had the hurricane in the South, places like Alabama and Mississippi.
That's true. And you think about that, but, maybe there was a miss, one little calculation.
Maybe it's not that perfect yet.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's not quite. It was aiming for Louisiana again, but somehow,
Did he hit all the Republican states? I mean, maybe it should have been a hurricane that would have hit states that are predominantly Republican.
Yeah.
you would think.
Although maybe
That would
maybe
make
it
more
just shows
sense.
how subtle he really is.
Because isn't like New Jersey and predominantly,
Oh, yeah,
Dem-
New Jersey, New York are very
Democratic
Democratic.
Oh, yeah,
state?
it slammed into the Democratic.
and that's just
But then
ridiculous.
it made him look presidential, because he got to walk around with Chris Christie and
That's
look
very
president.
true.
Maybe that's it.
Well,
Maybe
that
that's
could've
what he
been
was
it.
doing.
That
Okay.
could have been it. We were talking about minorities, and I think it's Gloria
Steinem?
Steinem. I think she's the one that said she would like to have all white women vote like black women. Because black women statistically vote for what is good for them. And she would like to see more white women do that, who do not statistically vote for what is good for them.
Do you know what's interesting too? A lot of people have noticed that Catholics voted for President Obama, and their Catholic hierarchy went to some trouble to try to keep that from happening. Catholic hierarchy, I know in Maryland, and I would assume in the other states, but the Catholic Church is very powerful in Maryland, went to some trouble to try to make sure Catholics in Maryland did not vote for same-sex marriage. Now, since it won pretty overwhelmingly, I would assume Catholics did, but I haven't seen statistics. But what's interesting about the Catholic vote for the president is that, in fact, white Catholics did not vote for President Obama. But when you add in Hispanic Catholics, they were overwhelming for President Obama. So,
Wow.
Very interesting.
That is very interesting. And if you are bored and saying to yourself, darn it, there's more political rhetoric here and we're done with it, the election was over, let's get on with our topic.
okay.
And, we are going to talk about today about the Boy Scouts of America, United Way, and some of the things that are going on there. And Pam, why don't you
Okay.
fill us in a little bit?
Well, as I'm sure most of you know, the Boy Scouts of America do discriminate against gay and lesbians, gays, I guess, because it's all boys, and transgendered children, and I guess lesbians too, because they don't let lesbians become den mothers. That's been a big topic a lot. What you may not realize is that they also discriminate against atheists, agnostics, and non-believers. I have a long thing here, the Boy Scouts Declaration of Religious Principles. I won't read it all to you, but the basic point says is that no member can grow into the kind of citizen without recognizing an obligation to God. So Boy Scouts have to believe in some religious tradition. In September, Pennsylvania non-believers wrote to the United Way of York County, because the United Way of York County is still supporting the Boy Scouts here in York County, and asked them to reconsider. We have to date not received a response. Then this story starts to get a little bit complicated, but hang in with me. There was an article in the York Daily Record that quoted the president of the United Way as saying that the United Way, which has a discrimination policy for its member agencies, that the discrimination policy did not apply to the member agencies, it only applied to the United Way itself. It only said that the United Way couldn't discriminate. Let me take 1 second, it's not long, and read to you this, and you tell me what you think, people out there. This is the United Way of York County's position on non-discrimination, which you can find on their website. United Way organizations ensure that each organization in which they invest is a nonprofit, tax-exempt charity governed by volunteers, and that each organization submits to an annual independent financial audit, provides services at a reasonable cost, and maintains a policy of non-discrimination. Okay, that sounds to me that it applies to the member agencies. But the president of the head of the United Way of York County said that, oh no, that wasn't true. Well, when I read that in the paper, I sent an email to the reporter who wrote the story and gave him this link and said, this does not seem to me to say what he said it said. Why don't you ask him about it? So he did. And a few days later, emailed me back and said that what someone from United Way, did not identify who he had spoken with, but someone from the United Way told him that it didn't matter, that the member agencies could discriminate against the LGBT community because the United Way itself does not have a rule against that. Well, okay, wait a minute. First of all, that's not what they said their non-discrimination policy meant. One would assume that they would know what their own non-discrimination policy meant. Second of all, I don't see how the thing I just read you says what he just said. It is very clear that it's only talking about, that it is talking about the member agencies. Third, just as a side note, it is in fact illegal in the city of York, which is where the United Way of York County is located, to discriminate on the basis of sexual preference. That is not true in the whole state of Pennsylvania. There is not a specific Pennsylvania law that says that, but the city of York does in fact have that in its ordinances, and the city of York has a Human Relations Commission that will prosecute people who discriminate on the basis of sexual orientation. All right, so it seems that they are confused. Let's just be kind and say that. The next thing that happened in this kind of odd story is that if you read the York Daily Record here in York County, you know that on Saturdays it awards thorns and roses to people it doesn't like and to people it does like. In the middle of all this, they gave a thorn to the United Way because they approved of the United Way finding a way to work with the Boy Scouts to continue to give them money. Now, this to me is appalling squared. Bad enough that the Boy Scouts discriminate. Bad enough that the United Way is desperately trying to figure out a way to pretend that they don't discriminate, or that it's okay that they discriminate, or that it doesn't matter that they discriminate. But triple bad is that the newspapers are saying, oh, isn't that great? I mean, come on, where the heck are we? I know everybody says central Pennsylvania is Alabama without the blacks, but for crying out loud. You know, this is, what century are we in here, folks? I mean, and finally, just to let you know where this is at the moment, we asked Robert Woods, who is the head of the United Way of York County, if he wanted to be on the show or if he wanted to call in, because let's be fair, maybe he can explain all this. Sent me an email that says that it would be premature for him to accept the invitation as the United Way of York County's relationship with the Boy Scouts is under review. Well, that's not what they said in the paper about a month and a half ago. Now, on the one hand, if that's a true statement, if in fact they are reviewing their relationship with the Boy Scouts and there's a possibility that they will cut funding, good for them. Congratulations, that's wonderful. Let's see what happens. And those of you who live in York County, since this issue is apparently up in the air, I don't see why you wouldn't want to get a hold of the York County United Way, send them an email, give them a phone call. You can find all the information on the web and just encourage them. And just speaking for members of Pennsylvania Nonbelievers, this issue seems to be mostly an LGBT issue. But remember, atheists too. They discriminated against, the Boy Scouts discriminated against atheists too. And that too is un-American, unpatriotic, and not necessary. We were talking before the show about the Girl Scouts. Jen, do you want to?
Well, the biggest interest I had in the Girl Scouts is I said, well, if we're going to go on and start attacking an organization that has all, I mean, if we just look at the policies of the Boy Scouts and the Girl Scouts and why they came about and why they're, why they were formed in the first place, they have these really wonderful, rich histories of doing wonderful things for boys, doing wonderful things for girls. However, when the Boy Scouts came about, their history seems to be more of keeping up with a manly, whatever society thinks man is. And I read an article that said that the Boy Scouts just seem to go along with social issues. They just kind of seem to fly with it. But Girl Scouts have always seemed to be over and above. And they had to be. When they first came out, I think it was around 1912?
I believe it was 1912.
I mean, they both started in England and came over to the United States.
Well, no, actually, I think the Girl Scouts were a United States creation. Juliet Gordon Low in Georgia.
Well, I think she actually was living overseas at the time and came back.
Right.
And she came over and started the Girl Scouts. And at the time she did, of course, this was radical. This was a radical move to have to teach women. Their goal was to teach women to be independent and think independently. And that was not really going along with the times back then. And the Girl Scouts have never gone along with the times. They've always set their own standards, and they've always, accomplished that. And they've been able to accomplish their objectives without intolerance.
Right. The Girl Scouts allow LGBT members, they do not have any kind of religious rule. So, and they've lived, thrived, and survived. They're doing just fine. And there is another religious angle to this. One of the reasons the Boy Scouts are so bound and determined to maintain their ban on gays is that they get a great deal of money from the Mormon Church. And the Mormon Church feels very strongly about this. So the Boy Scouts are sort of in a trap. I suspect there are many people in the Boy Scouts who find this really embarrassing. They're probably not real embarrassed about the atheist
I'm
ban.
assuming the Boy Scouts aren't really that concerned about the Jewish community.
And there's that too.
Because the Jewish community has come out and basically they are not in support of the Boy Scouts discriminating. And I mean, I have an interesting quote from a Jewish member who was a scout. He says, "My personal opinion is the scouting policy in place now is wrong. They're discriminating, and there's no way to justify discrimination in this day and age."
Well, it's interesting. I'm by far the oldest person on this panel, and I remember the Civil Rights Movement. I remember 1960, 1961, 1962. There were a lot of white people who said things like, African Americans just have to be more patient. Just give us a little more time. And, we can't, it'll just shake up, if we let people into our restaurants or into our schools, it will just upset the apple cart. It'll be a problem. It'll cause trouble. And in 3 or 4 years, the Civil Rights Act was passed in 1964. In a few years, everything had changed, and those people felt silly. It's not something they put in their resume. It's not something they want in the first paragraph of their obituary, that was a cause they fought and died for. And I think a lot of people who are fighting this action against LGBT people right now, in a couple of years, are going to be embarrassed. I'm surprised. I suspect some of them are embarrassed now when their kids ask them about it, or their grandchildren ask them why they support discrimination. But it's time for them to take a stand.
Well, there was a thing I found, there was Scouts for Equality, which was founded by Eagle Scout Zach Walls. He had a membership of 3,000 former Eagle Scouts and accumulated almost 1 million signatures opposing the Boy Scouts of America's ban through various petitions. And there's also another organization called Scouting for All that was pushing for tolerance. So there is a lot inside the organization. A lot of people are upset with this. And they're trying to get the hierarchy to change their minds. But like you said, so many of them are dependent on funding, like from the Mormon Church or Catholic Church or wherever they get their funding, because 60% of all Scouts meet in a church or synagogue. And in fact, it's considered part of a ministry of many churches that they have the Boy Scouts there. So in many ways, it's an uphill battle for people trying to overcome a lot of these obstacles because there's just so much pressure against them not to change.
Well, as Christopher Hitchens used to say, religion poisons everything. You start getting that dependent on the church, and then you wake up one morning and you have to do what the church wants, even if you are embarrassed by it or if you know in your heart it's the wrong thing to do.
But it's interesting, though, that with the Boy Scouts, they say about believing in God, but they also accept Buddhists, and Buddhists do not believe in a deity. So how does that work for them? I don't understand. If you have a Buddhist scout, and Buddhists do not have a deity, but you can have a Buddhist, you can have an atheist. I don't quite understand how that works out.
I think it's just barely possible that some of the people running the Boy Scouts might not be familiar enough with Buddhism to understand that.
So I shouldn't have said anything.
Yeah, you just blown it. There you go.
To all the Buddhist Boy Scouts out there, I'm extremely sorry. We'll see you cut the segment. See, people in the hierarchy say, what?
Those poor Buddhists.
Yes, my face will be up on it. He's the one that got us out of this. He reminded them that Buddhists do not believe in it.
Well, now the Buddhist Boy Scouts know who to call at night and harass.
Oh.
Well, there's got to be, though. I mean, we always talk about Buddhists, we talk about Muslims, Mormons, Jewish, Christians. What other, there has to be other, are there any other religions out there that have tried to infiltrate the Boy Scouts and just stayed quiet about their, I mean, there's so many religions out there. We're only hitting the surface of the ones that everybody knows, but there's so many minority religions out there.
I honestly don't know the answer to that. I don't know.
No, I don't either. And I think that it's, well, when this started happening in York County, there were quotes from the Boy Scouts saying something along the general lines of, if we had a boy and we thought he was gay, we would try to talk to him. They were trying to make it sound like we really wouldn't do anything, you know? But that would be only true if the boy was willing to keep his mouth shut. Or if, say, somebody who wanted to be a den mother kept it a secret that she was a lesbian. And I think they probably think that's a reasonable compromise. But of course, it's not a reasonable compromise. It's a rotten compromise. People should be able to be who they are, which is actually sort of how I feel about the United Way at this stage, too. If, in fact, they want to discriminate, they should just say it. This kind of pretending that their non-discrimination rules, which are crystal clear, somehow don't apply is nonsense. You know, own what you believe.
Well, that's why I would much prefer someone just to come out and say that.
Yes.
Say, I believe that we should discriminate, and this is why, instead of trying to use this flowery language to try to get around and say, well, we don't really discriminate. We have this policy and we can't change it for this reason. But we really don't. We're not discriminating. This is just the way it is.
And there's just nothing we can do.
There's nothing we can do. Throw the hands up like.
This policy that they can't change, too, this was under review for 2 years.
The Boy Scouts, oh, yeah.
I mean, so this is a policy that for 2 years, they probably just kept sweeping under the table saying, well, we're not going to do anything about it. We're not. And then finally, 2 years later, we can't do anything. We tried, but policy is policy.
I think that's true. And my understanding is that there are some hardliners in heading the Boy Scouts who feel very strongly about it, even though a lot of other people are uncomfortable with it, embarrassed by it. But they just don't have the authority or the power to stand up to them. I think it's going to be very interesting to see what happens here, because I can't believe 10 years from now we'll be having this conversation. The world is changing too fast.
Well, Jen made a comment earlier about the Boy Scouts having this vision of what it means to be a man. Mm-hmm. And I think a factor is that a lot of the leadership is older men. Mm-hmm. And they have this vision from the 1950s of what a man is supposed to be like. And in their view, the idea of having a gay person in there does not fit into their program, into their stereotype. So therefore, they're very reluctant to try to change things. I think a lot of it's even having transgendered youth in there. They can't conceive of this. It's very much like the Vatican hierarchy. You have these old celibate men trying to come up with these rules for women and things, and it's just not working. It just does not work. So you have that problem with the Boy Scouts.
Well, we were talking a little bit, too, about how the Vatican, a lot of people have heard about the Vatican war on nuns, but the Vatican also, well, not the Vatican per se, but Catholic hierarchy, especially in the United States, has taken war on the Girl Scouts as well. You were talking about that, too.
Yeah, well, the Catholics aren't really impressed with the Girl Scouts. They apparently aren't in favor of their open policy. There was a case, I don't know how many years ago, I think the child was 7, transgender child, was a boy, saying he was a girl, felt strongly about that, wanted to join the Girl Scouts. At the time, the leader said, no, we can't do that. However, the authority said, oh, no, you can join, that's fine. There must have been a misunderstanding here. Now, I don't think the child did join, but the Girl Scouts had left the door open. And I'm sure that door is open to other transgender children. They do not discriminate against your sexual orientation. Now, I'm sure they don't talk about it as well. It's just not it's not talked about as much, although I think lesbians feel a little more comfortable talking about being a lesbian than homosexual men. I mean, I still
I think historically that's very definitely true.
Yeah, I mean, I just think that, men just seem to be a little bit more, the elderly population, a little bit more homophobic or pretend to be homophobic.
Well, I think girls have always had a wider range of behaviors. A girl can be a tomboy, and it's okay. It's kind of cute. But a boy can't be a sissy. Now,
That's true.
changing and all to the good. But I think, especially if you're talking about people my age, that's something we grew up with.
And so some of these issues may have, caused the Girl Scouts to keep their open door policy. I mean, it just, to them, it wouldn't look right to be discriminatory towards anybody. But I just think that their organization really does show how you can include everyone and meet your objectives. It doesn't matter who you are, although the Catholic Church feels differently. And I think the Catholic Church would like to start their own type of Girl Scout group.
I'm sure that's true. And I know that we were talking about this before too, that the Catholic Church has accused the Girl Scouts of having relationships with Planned Parenthood or organizations that have relationships with Planned Parenthood. And it's simply not true. There's a big furore right now in Indiana, where as a matter of fact, the man who used to be the Bishop of Harrisburg is now the Bishop of South Bend, Indiana, and he's sort of heading the charge there. And I know there had been a problem in Philadelphia where Catholic girls for some years were not allowed to be Girl Scouts. And it's just, I mean, talk about why do you want to pick on them? I mean, surely you have other enemies that you could fight other than the Girl Scouts. It almost seems kind of silly.
Well, here's another thing. It may be a fallacy that they're not doing anything with Planned Parenthood, but if this was something, if they did have meat to this, what does it matter? I mean, Planned Parenthood is in itself an organization that promotes health to women.
Well, you and we all agree with that. But to the Catholic Church, you can't be much worse than Planned Parenthood. It is a complete and utter den of iniquity.
It is abortion central. It's like
That's right.
this horrible, horrible place.
Well, it's sex central, too.
Well, that
It's
too,
not
yeah.
just abortion. It's
Oh, that's
also,
true.
Because that's
they're going to
true.
talk about sex, and they're going to give girls pills so they have sex, and, they'll think they can be independent, and, can't have any of that.
Yeah, that's true. I didn't think about it that way. I was focusing so much on their abortion issues that I forgot that there's this whole personhood issue
Yes.
that goes along with Planned Parenthood. But in the end, Planned Parenthood does promote health.
Oh, yes.
I mean, that is their goal. Their goal is for women to stay healthy. That is their goal.
Well, and I think the support Planned Parenthood has received after all the problems it had with the Catholic Church and other organizations as well earlier this year shows that people understand that. I think one of the things that has been interesting and gratifying in the last week is that despite all the misinformation, people understand the issues and understand truth and non-truth, and that's encouraging. You don't see that every day.
That's true. And I think I would like to bring up the point that we're not discouraging groups such as the Boy Scouts, groups that get young men together and go out into society, and they do a lot of wonderful things. What we don't support is their discrimination policy. That is it.
Right.
The group itself, I think, has some wonderful missions and some wonderful things about it. It's just it's discrimination, and you just can't be that way in society anymore. I don't see any problem with welcoming other people. And in this society, let's face it, there's probably a lot more homosexual men in Boy Scouts currently that are fighting their homosexuality because there still is a stigma attached.
Well, and if you're religious, of course, you think that you can pray the gay away.
Yeah.
Some religious people think that, not all.
But I mean, there are still young men out there, and probably young women too, that are struggling with this sexual identity. And, they're feeling strongly that they're homosexual, but still in this society, there are issues about coming out.
Oh, sure.
Very much so.
I mean, as an adult, as an actor, as a a figure, maybe it's starting to die off. However, in our high schools, in our middle schools, this is still a really big issue.
I heard the saddest report on TV this afternoon. There was a shelter for lesbian and gay children in New York City that was destroyed, Hurricane Sandy. So there was a fund, Ali Sheedy, of all people, was raising funds for it. And she was talking about the shelter, and she said it's the only one in the United States, and it's completely, they can't use it at all now. It's completely destroyed. And she said, and we don't know what's going to happen to the children. And it turns out, we're talking about children here. We're talking about 12, 13, 14-year-olds who have, in many cases, been thrown out by their parents because they came out and have no place to go, and they're living on the streets. And just think about that. I mean, to let your religion, and often it's often religion, sometimes it's just what the neighbors think, but to let your religion drive you to a point that you'll throw away your children. I don't understand how the good God encourages that.
I don't understand that either. I mean, there's just so much, just hatred and nonsense coming out when it comes to situations like this, that they say, well, this is because this Holy Scripture says that it was written 2,000 plus years ago. And they're willing to do this, disown their own children. And I just find that appalling. But yet they think they're being righteous by doing this. And it's so much, I mean, they will say this, like the Boy Scouts will say, well, we're a private organization. We should be able to have what we want. And to an extent, I agree with that. As a private organization, you have the right to exclude whoever you want to. But at the same time, society has an obligation to stand up also and say, we don't accept this.
Right.
You can keep this, but you will pay a price for this. Right. And people say, well, that you shouldn't do that. It's like, well, why not? Why shouldn't we do that? It happened back in the 60s. People would boycott certain businesses that would not cater to blacks. And it's just saying, you can continue with your policies, but you also have to pay a societal price for this.
Well, a lot of Boy Scouts, they advertise in schools. And you're right, they're a private organization. They might have, maybe they should have the ability to discriminate against who they want. However, we don't allow religions to go into our schools and sit down and say, come
say
over
we
here.
don't, but sometimes we do.
You're the Presbyterians. I mean, we make sure that doesn't happen because there is a line between church and state. Well, maybe the Boy Scouts shouldn't be in elementary schools marketing themselves. And
actually, I agree with you. I think that maybe the time has come for them to become an overtly religious organization with all the restrictions that implies.
Exactly. I mean, if they're going to maintain those policies, then isn't that what they are?
We figure that those are religious-based policies. Because I would love to talk to a Scout leader and ask, what is it about kids who are gay or kids who are atheists that would keep them from becoming Boy Scouts? What is your reason for keeping them, for excluding them out? And the only reason they could possibly give has to be a religious reason. And so you might as well be an official religious organization to say this is what we are, this is what we believe. Because in my mind, there is nothing that says that should say that a kid who's an atheist would not make a good scout. A child who's a homosexual would not make a good scout. It's ludicrous to me.
Well, I think with the atheist issue, what they would say is that you can't possibly have good moral character. A lot of people think that about atheists. For people who are not atheists, the whole question of, well, how do you know right from wrong? How do you know what to do? They think that that's something we worry about when actually we know the difference between right and wrong. I don't think for most atheists that's a big concern, but I think people who are not atheists and don't know very many open atheists, you actually probably know atheists, they just haven't come out to you. But for people who don't know many atheists, the whole idea of how do you know how to behave? How do you know, why don't you cheat on your wife? That kind of thing is to them a real question, more so than it is to us.
That's like saying, how do you know how to wake up in the morning?
Yeah, really. Really.
I mean, gee, how do I do that each morning and get out of bed? I mean, how do I manage myself?
I find it fascinating when I hear religious people say that if they didn't believe in God, they would be out there pillaging and killing and raping. And that says a lot more about you than it does about...
I agree.
It's like, is this the kind of person you really are? Are you telling me that the only reason you're not out there killing and raping and pillaging is because you're afraid of hell. That's the only reason you're doing
Right, but
this.
basically at night, what you dream about is
This is what you think about at night.
Well, it's interesting because I've actually asked people that. I've said, what is it that you want to do? I mean, what is this thing? You want to, break and knock over a liquor store? You want to go down, if it's a woman, go down to Baltimore and walk up and down the block and pick up sailors? I mean, what is the thing that you're holding back from? And of course, there's nothing. They just all sort of mutter something under their breath. They laugh, because no, they're not going to do those things. I did once see an interview with a minister and his wife, and somebody asked him a variation of that question, and he said something about he would probably have extramarital affairs. And what was funny about that is his wife gave him a really dirty look. And I thought, well, yeah, it's an interesting answer to that question. And I do think for most people, the sex question is the one that they've got in the back of their mind. If it weren't that God was going to throw me into hell, maybe I'd fool around more. Or maybe I'd do drugs,
Yeah, and that probably is a big question on their mind. And like you said, though, that just tells you something about them. I mean, I in this society, I don't think if we didn't have religion, we would be a society of pillagers and rapists and...
Well, look at all the societies in Europe that have way less violent crime than we do.
Sweden and stuff.
Yeah, and they're not religious at all.
Yeah. I wonder how they do it.
Yes, I wonder how they do
How do they manage?
How did they manage? And I can't remember who it was. My mind is so muddled with all these figures that basically he's an atheist who says you just, it's about doing the least amount of harm. That's what it is. All your decisions are just doing the least amount of harm. I mean, of course I'm not going to go up and tell somebody off for no good reason. That's just going to harm them. It's going to harm me. It's not going to look good. What's it going to do?
You're not going
What
to
am I
try
gonna
to get out of
accomplish?
paying a check in a restaurant, because the waitress's back is turned. That's not what decent people do.
Exactly. I mean, it does baffle me. It does baffle me that that we have to tackle this moral issue. And we actually had, this is so exciting. We actually had people come to our door on Saturday.
Oh, really?
It was terrible, though, because it was so embarrassing. I mean, it's a Saturday morning, it's 10 o'clock, and I just had no inkling on getting ready for the day. So here I am in my robe. My husband and I are playing chess, and my hair is probably out to here. I mean, my hair is just all over the place. I mean, it was just awful. And here's this young 15-year-old girl and a woman of... an elderly woman, I'm not sure what her age would have been, comes to the door, and it's like, darn it, I mean, at least want to look nice, people come to my door, and of course my husband is so accommodating, come on in. No, come on, it's cold out there, we have a fire going in here, because at the time it was still cold out. I mean, Saturday ended up to be a beautiful day, and they actually did come in. And my husband must have kept them in the house for about an hour.
Did they have to beg to leave or something? It's like,
No,
I
but
don't want to hear it anymore.
You'll be they'll have a black mark next to your name on the Jehovah's Witness list.
That's what I said. I think we're going to have the red X over our house. He says, well, maybe not. I mean, maybe some other people need to come and change us of our evil ways.
Sometimes they do interpret it as a challenge.
Yeah. So who knows? We might be either a red X or...
So you may get the more hardcore Jehovah's Witnesses come because the challenge now, because they left and they said we couldn't deal with all the questions. You have somebody else go in.
Well, it's like when you buy a car, they have to go back and get the manager.
Yeah.
And it's true. A lot of questions were posed, and there was just not an answer.
Well, and sometimes their stumper questions are just nonsensical to us. I mean, it's like, aren't you afraid to die? Well, yeah. But it's like, just because I think it would be nice if there were a Santa Claus doesn't mean that I believe in Santa Claus. Whether or not I believe there's a Santa Claus has absolutely nothing to do with whether or not there actually is a Santa Claus. And it's the same sort of thing. All right, so you think it's nice, the idea of a God is nice and you find it comforting, but that doesn't mean it's true.
Right, exactly. Well, interestingly enough, the Jehovah's Witnesses, they don't know what happens when you die.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, no, they don't know. They don't know what happens when you die. And my husband says, well, you can apply, skepticality and reason to that issue. Why not the rest of them? They don't really have a hell that they believe in. So that's an open-ended question. But I'm sure part of doing what's right is you may not know it's going to happen, but just in case. You know? I mean,
Pascal picture.
yeah,
Just in case.
yeah,
Be ready.
we always got to fill in that just in case. I read again. I always mention Facebook when I'm on the show, and it just something popped up on my thing, and it said, "On the bright side, my coffee won't get cold in hell." And I'm like, you know what? That's going on my mug. That's my new mug's motto. You know.
Always look at the bright side.
Yes,
That's right.
If there is a hell, and I still have hot coffee, so there's a positive. You know? I have nothing to worry about now.
What?
Well, except for the fact that the caffeine might kill me and get me there faster.
I was
you
gonna-
know?
That's right. That's right. Here on Earth, that would be the downside.
Yeah, that would be the downside here. But, you know,
But it's interesting when they come to your door, though, that they, they'll ask you some sort of question like, would you like to know the secret of happiness? And I always like to say no. No, thank you. No.
you know, the same thing happens. We hear this so much. This world is just going down. I mean, it's what is the word they use? I'm not thinking of that one word that this world is just
Well,
Descending or what?
oppressed. I mean, we're just, we're tyrants. We're at war. We're doing all this stuff. I mean, society's getting worse and worse and
we're
worse.
heading for the end times. Yes.
We're heading for the end times. I mean, and I hear this year after year after year, and it's like, well, can we get there already?
That's right. What is keeping them? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it just seems to me that, yeah, there are some things that we need to work on, but wow, I mean, you can go to the hospital for a major medical problem and come out cured.
Well, yeah.
You
If you
know?
look how most people lived even 200 years ago, this is a big improvement. Most of us would not be happy if they put us back in 1812.
Most of us would not be alive if they put us back in
That's very
1812.
Well,
True.
that's true. I'm
Yeah,
way
time
over the
for
average
time.
life expectancy for 1812.
I mean, I grew up with serious asthma and had bronchial asthma, bronchitis. My airways were closing. If I didn't have some of those inhalers that I was given, one time I was given medicine, I was given a shot just to get the medicine in me right away to open up my airways. I probably wouldn't have made it. You know, modern medicine is one of the reasons why a lot of people are sitting down today. They're not sick. They're walking around. They're doing great. So in terms of medicine, we're getting better. We're getting much better.
Well, and living conditions in general are better. And people are more tolerant. I mean, obviously, as we've been talking about tonight, we got a ways to go. But people are way more tolerant than they were even 35 or 40 years ago.
Well, people talk about the world. I mean, it may not look like it because the evening news always emphasizes the bad, but the world is getting better. I mean, we don't have slavery anymore. There are less wars now. We don't tolerate a lot of things we tolerate. Like you talk about discrimination, we don't tolerate those kind of things anymore. And we still have a long way to go, but we've made incredible strides in the past, past 100 years. It's been incredible. The things we no longer tolerate that we used to think was, oh, that's fine.
All sorts of things. Again, I remember racial discrimination. I did not grow up here. I grew up in St. Louis. And St. Louis didn't have separate waiting rooms or separate restrooms, but there were restaurants that black people didn't go to. There was a big excursion ship on the Mississippi. There was a specific day when black people went to that. There was an outdoor civic theater. There were certain sections that black people could sit in. And again, it wasn't formal, but everybody knew, and nobody was going to be the one to fight that until all of a sudden in 1964, thereabouts. In fact, when I was growing up in Missouri, black and white people couldn't marry. You had to go to Illinois. And, when that changed, it changed like that, and it was okay. I mean, riots didn't start.
World didn't
All hell
end.
didn't break loose. Yeah, it was okay. And I think, again, that's what's happening with gay rights, and let's hope, seems to be happening with atheists too, ever so slowly. The numbers of atheists seem to be, every time you see a poll, the number of atheists is increasing.
Well, I think that's giving more people a reason to be open. All of a sudden, they're not alone.
Exactly right.
And I really, since we were talking in the beginning of the show about people we admire and want to shout out to, some of those early atheists 20 years ago, 25 years ago, that came out on television programs and promoted atheism. That was a very brave move. There was their numbers. They were alone. They were alone in being attacked, and they sat there and took it.
And in the 1950s, it was godless communism. So not only were you were going to hell, you were a traitor. And, you know, that leads into the Pledge of Allegiance and God We Trust on the Money, all that incredible dumb stuff that came about in the 1950s. You guys probably know this, but there were people who seriously said that you had to put God in the Pledge of Allegiance because communists wouldn't say it, and then you'd know who they were. And,
Their tongues would catch on fire or something.
or something like that. Maybe their heads would explode.
Heads explode.
And you'd know, see? So it was a patriotic thing to do.
It is interesting reading about the past, about how atheists were associated with communists, and even to this day, you know, there are people that think, you say atheist, they think communist
Right. Or they think traitor,
or traitor.
unpatriotic.
Or devil worshippers.
I've had people ask me that. I say I'm an atheist. They say, so that means you're a witch. No, doesn't mean I'm a witch. That means you worship Satan. No, doesn't mean I worship Satan. Keep going. You'll
Well,
get there.
you know, and a lot of times the whole thing about worshiping Satan and stuff, that there really wasn't a lot of people out there that sacrificed babies or sacrificed virgins or anything like that. That was a name given to people who did not support the Catholic Church or did not support the Christian ways. It was basically they were heathens, and we had to make them look as bad as possible. So that's the name we gave them.
Well, and there are all sorts of studies that show that most of the women who were burned at the stake or otherwise executed in the witch trials were middle-aged women. Women who, and they tended to be women who had some money and some property and who were widows. So that there wasn't a lot of societal control over them, and that made people nervous. So guess what? They became witches.
Isn't that amazing?
Yes.
That is amazing. My favorite thing is, you know, you'll see this in a lot of movies too. Tie a rock to the witch, right? And if she drowns, she wasn't a witch, and if she comes up, she was a witch, and we kill her. You know.
That's right. It does not work out well for you either way.
No, it's kind of a lose-lose
Either way,
situation.
you're losing.
It's like how if you were the person who's accused of witchcraft. I mean, how do you what outcome do you want? You either drowned or you're burned at the stake. It's like so. And what is the reaction of the family members if they accuse somebody of being a witch and the person drowns? They say, you know what, you were right. Your mom wasn't a witch.
Good to know.
Oh, sorry.
Now you could live the rest of your life in peace, but your friend's mom.
Worry about her.
Yeah.
Somebody tie a rock to her and see if she sinks.
It's just so amazing when you hear about, and all this was just fear.
It was.
You know, and how do you think Hitler got so good at what he did? How do you think he was able to put all those people in concentration camps? Fear. You know?
Yeah.
What does it say about the human race, though, that we are so gullible to this, that we are so susceptible to fear-mongering, and people get whipped up into craziness? You find it on talk radio all the time. It's like,
Yeah, it's not it's not encouraging to listen to talk radio.
no, it is not. It affects your mind. But it's the things that people will say things on talk radio that are absolutely ludicrous, easily proven false, but people believe it. Yeah. The old Obama is a Kenyan. Obama is a socialist. You know, he's a spy. It's like, I mean...
Well, don't you think a lot of that is displaced racism? It's people who are really uncomfortable with the fact that he's black, but they don't want to say that because they don't want to be racist. And in their hearts, they don't think they are racist. So they find something else.
It's an excuse, in
Right.
other words.
And then they say, well, he's a Kenyan. You know, he really shouldn't be president at all. I'm not a racist or anything. He's a Kenyan, you know?
Yeah, I think that's very true. I think a lot of times people don't want to, you can't really be an out racist anymore and be accepted. So you have to find ways to kind of get around it and say, I don't hate him because he's black. I hate him because he's a Kenyan. Or I hate him because he's a Marxist or a Muslim. You know, you have some reason, other reason. It doesn't matter how ludicrous it is.
Yeah.
You know, they find a reason to hate him.
Well, and I think, you know, if you really want to take all of the racism out of it, that man is a Democrat.
Well, that's what it boils down to. He's a Democrat.
So, and I mean, if you don't like the president in office, you have to find something wrong. I mean, there's got to be something wrong with them, something to get them out of office, because you don't like that person and you know someone else could do better.
And I think there's a real sense, like Bill O'Reilly the other night, talking about how it's not our country anymore.
Nice.
I think looking at Obama really symbolizes that. It's not, he just doesn't look like the other presidents, and it's a symbol of the fact that it's becoming an increasingly diverse country.
He's a funny name, too.
Yeah, he has a funny name, he doesn't look like former presidents, maybe he's a Muslim, and I think atheists suffer from that too, in that there's this memory, not, people your age don't remember the 50s. I remember the 50s, and it wasn't that much fun, everybody. It wasn't Leave It to Beaver and Andy Griffith all the time. It really wasn't. But that's what people remember. They remember white people and intact families and everybody going fishing together, and, you know, that's what they think.
The myth of
Right.
pre-60s America, that they have this Leave It to Beaver type mentality. This is the way it was. And they've sanitized it. They've made this into a myth. And when I hear people say, I want my America back, you know, traditional America doesn't exist anymore. And it's like, what are you referring to? What exactly don't you have anymore? And they have this myth of America that never really existed, except in their minds. And it's comforting to them, but it's not real. And you try to point this out and say, this 50s was not this idyllic time, you know. There's a lot of strife, there's a lot of discrimination, but yet they've set it up in their minds that this is somehow was a better world. Like somehow everything was fine until like 1962.
Right.
And then everything went to hell.
Right.
And we need to get back to those old days. And I remember hearing Pastor John Hagee, you know, on the radio once say, or not once, just very recently say that right before the election, we have to get back to our Christian heritage.
It's funny you
It's
should
like,
say
what does that mean?
And it's really funny you should say that, because as our show sadly comes to a close today, I'm thinking that our next show, we will talk about America. Is it a Christian nation? What's going on?
And what does it mean to be a Christian?
Yeah,
What does it mean?
What does that mean?
That's right,
Yeah.
what would that mean?
So, I mean, you know, again, in 2 weeks, we'll be back on. It'll be, what will be the date?
November 27th.
There you go. No, Tuesday, November 27th, 6 p.m. We will tackle that issue with vehemence. And hopefully we will get some support from our viewers.
In other words, somebody please call.
But hopefully we'll get some support on that issue. And I mean, it's going to be an interesting topic. There's a lot of rich history that we have.
Yes.
And a lot to talk about.
A lot of made-up history that we have.
A lot of made up, too.
A lot of myths to talk about.
A lot of
your
myths to talk about, a lot of myths about what really happened.
And again, encourage our viewers to, you know, check out our topics. You can always Google the Boy Scouts and find out about any kind of discrimination. And if you have a comment or you feel that we didn't cover something clearly enough, you might want to write in to Facebook or something like that.
And remember to get in touch with the United Way of York County and just let them know how you feel about them supporting the Boy Scouts.
And if you don't do all that, we hope to see you.
If you want to do nothing at all.
We hope to see you either, was it this Thursday for Sam Singleton
That's right.
in Hagerstown?
And November 29th in Harrisburg for the
At
ACLU.
Yes. So we hope to see you there, and we can't wait to see you. And you all have a very good 2 weeks.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving.
That's right. Happy Thanksgiving.